Welcome to the Coming Home Well podcast with your guest host, Tish Hevel, CEO and founder of the Brain Donor Project. Join Tish as she talks to veterans and veteran caregivers about the importance of brain donation to help researchers learn more about brain injuries and diseases that affect our veteran community. Now, here's your host, Tish Hevel.
Hi, everybody. I want to welcome Suzanne Waddingham with us today. She is a career RN who has spent all that time working with military families. Suzanne, welcome.
Hi, Tish. Thank you. Great to be here with you.
I'm so glad you're here. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the organization that you're with now?
Absolutely. So I work for Semper America's Fund, which is one of the larger nonprofits serving wounded warriors in the country today. We've been around since 2003, actually, mainly programming for lifetime support, really. We say we will be with you for your lifetime to serve those with financial needs, but also many, many, many other wellness programs. And part of that is the visiting nurse program. I'm a nurse who is working alongside 20 other nurses within the fund across the country. We cover all 50 states. And we provide kind of long-term medical case management for our service members, help them to navigate the medical systems they're dealing with, help them navigate some of the unique needs they have, and help reduce the barriers to care.
Wow, that's a pretty broad mission, which is great because, you know, there are many needs. Let me just ask you first, has the pandemic impacted your ability to help? When you say you work with all these families, do you do that face-to-face or?
We are uniquely able to do face-to-face visits. Of course, we did curtail that during the pandemic. We did a lot of other support via Zoom. We all became very good at the telehealth thing, right?
Yeah.
Or Skype or FaceTime or whatever they were comfortable with. So we continued that as much as possible because for some that was just critical. But we are back at making face-to-face visits, of course, following guidelines as best we can.
Gotcha. So I imagine you see a lot of brain injuries.
We do. Absolutely.
Okay. And does that manifest more physically or emotionally, in your opinion?
Oh, wow. So pretty well known how much the symptomology for brain injury and PTSD overlap, right? There's so much overlap going on. So we see the brain injuries manifest in any number of ways, of course, many, 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 but we try to tease out the history. We listen to our patients, our service members' stories as best we can. We don't always have access to all their medical records unless they share those with us, but we and their service records, of course, as well. But we just do detailed histories and assessments to determine what their exposures may have been, always with regards to blast injury or trauma to the head. And so that is part of our nursing assessment. And absolutely, we see physical and mental health manifestations across the board, both.
Do you talk about brain donation with these, veterans and their families?
Sometimes I absolutely do. It's a difficult conversation to have, right? It's kind of alongside the advanced directive conversations. I'm have been uniquely associated with organ donation as a young nurse. One of my very first nursing jobs, I actually was working in ICU and had an experience with a young man who ended up being an organ donor. And so it has always been at the forefront of my thought process with regards to just the gift that it can be as far as just living donation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, I have also had the, I don't want to say opportunity, a better word is just I've had the incidents to have lost some of my service members to any number of causes, actually, but obviously to suicide. Others to tragic accidents, motor vehicle accidents, a few others to actually cancer, brain cancer. And then just massive stroke one recently. And so I have had the opportunity to work with some other organizations and look into the option of brain donation for the purpose of research, of course, for this population. And so I've had the experience of actually working alongside a family to broach the subject as well. A lot of my service members luckily are learning about this more and more. They're recognizing that something has happened to them. They're not the same as how they used to be. And they want to know, they want their families to know, and they want to know that whatever they've experienced, especially unfortunately because they're very frustrated with some of the voids in the care and the voids in just knowledge, the knowledge base, they want there to be learning done to help their brothers. I mean, they have lived lives of service, right? And to those on their left and their right, it still remains very important to them to continue to do that. And so that's kind of the conversation we have in ways that they can continue to do that through brain donation.
Yeah. Do you find that I'm always interested because I think that newer generations of people have more self-awareness of what's going on. But I also think, so I don't know if it's that as much as stigmas about, behavioral and emotional consequences of things that people have been through make it, I hate to use the word easier, but more clear to people who are going through it, and it makes them a little more open to different kinds of therapies and things they might be able to do to advance science. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, I do a lot of psychoeducation, and I just feel like knowledge is power. And the more they know about all of it, it gives them all the more tools for their own health and wellness. And it does absolutely, you're absolutely right. It makes the conversation, it normalizes the issues, it makes the conversation easier. And once the conversation begins, then there's just a lot of opportunity for growth with that.
Yeah. Is it harder with the individuals or their families to talk about brain donation?
Oh, always with the families, of course, because they're dealing with a situation usually where there's been a tragic loss of life, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm still working with a population that's way too young to be passing away.
Right.
But uh, in general, no, I find that working with the veterans and having the conversation with the veterans, they're very open to it. They're generally more concerned about how their family might deal with the decision. But of course, I always have long conversations with them about how important that conversation is to have with their family members.
As you know, I work in brain donation in a broader population. One of the things that we find, and I'm wondering if you see this as well, that after, in the face of a great loss, many families tell me that they feel some sense of comfort knowing that this great loss could actually, help future generations deal. Do you find that with military families, or are they just more sad that the suffering is, how do they feel? Do they feel that way?
They absolutely feel they recognize their service members, their family members' interest in serving, in continuing to serve, even after they've passed. Most of those families are legacy military. Many families are legacy military families, and so that is a pride factor for them. That is an openness to them to continue to see their family member to be able to continue to serve in that way. Absolutely.
That's wonderful. I'm glad they feel that after all that they've been through. Are
Yeah,
they so?
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. You
The
go.
other thing that is important, I think, to remind them too, though, is that many of the organizations out there that are harvesting brains and are doing all this research are able to provide them with some sort of clarity, some sort of answers.
Yeah, the
And yeah,
pathology report.
absolutely. And that's so helpful for so many of them.
That's one of the things I was going to ask you about medically. I recently learned that blast injuries create a different pathology sort of in the brain than actual brain injuries do. Can you talk about that and how those symptoms are different?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the subject at all, but I have worked extensively with some others who are, and what it seems to be that for years we've been aware of how blast exposure and blast waves affect other organs, right? The mainly throughout the chest and torso, and some of the pathology that's identifiable after that. But no one had really started looking at the brain effects for quite some time until just recently. And yes, they're finding very, very different pathologies within that, just with regards to at the cellular level. Personally, I see a very interesting kind of, I call it the perfect storm. We see young men mainly, and women, but young men mainly, whose brains are still developing between the ages of, say, 18 and 25, placed in combat situations where they're exposed to blast. They are also many times in a very high stress situation, a low sleep situation, and they have experienced any number of like intensities of blast exposure, right? Many of them, some of them in training even, but many of them in very, very different scenarios. So I always explain to my guys, listen, you could be in an alleyway in Iraq with a very small blast exposure, a relatively small blast, and have all kinds of, effect that would be very different from a very large blast exposure in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan. It goes to the importance of assessment and hearing their stories and establishing. They love to tell them. They actually love to tell them. So assessing all those details, that kind of it allows me to see how there's very, very clear. There must be very, very clear evidence. There's some impact. There's some, not to coin a term, but there is definitely an effect on their brains at that point. And then when you think about it, young kids now who have brain injury in say football or soccer, they are put on brain rest for a period of time, right? They're
That's
not
the
to
protocol.
be
Yeah.
TV. The protocols are very, very strict with regards to that. Well, my guys did not rest.
Yeah.
They usually stood up and shook it off and cleared the dust out of their ears, and they had to move on because they had their buddies on their left and their right to continue to move alongside with and perform in combat, let alone go back to very rarely did they go back and rest. So at least early on. Now, obviously the military got better at recognizing the risk and better at mitigating the risk as time went on. But early on, there was just a lot of brain injury that occurred because they were in a very high stress situation, and those brains were very, very, very exposed, and then also unable to heal.
What sort of emotional, behavioral, mental symptoms do you see most often in your guys, whether it's blast injury or, yeah?
Sure. Well, probably the number one is sleep disruption. Sleep seems to be across the board, and that's very well known with regards to TBI anyway. But then you add on PTSD, you add on a heightened sympathetic nervous system situation, you add on many times shift work, being awake at night and asleep during the day or at any hours, or having to be prepared and on guard at any time.
Hard on people in general,
Sleep is
right?
consistent, absolutely. Sleep is across the board. I mean, generally as a society now, right, is a challenge.
Yeah.
So they almost all develop or have sleep issues. Emotionally, many of them have a problem with the quickness to anger. A lot of anxiety issues that are just very difficult for them to control. Impulsivity many times enters in. Difficulty with judgment enters in. These are places where many times, again, PTSD and TBI can overlap. Depression, of course, becomes common. What's interesting if you're able to treat TBI symptoms and address those, many times the depression and the PTSD symptoms can really, really improve. Some of that is just a feeling of lack of control that I think they have when they have these TBI symptoms happening, that many times are also cognitive, memory-based. Short-term memory loss is very common. And so when you are able to address some of those, many times some of the other issues start to resolve, or at least become more
More
manageable,
manageable.
right?
Yeah.
Manageable.
So do you do that with talk therapy? The treatment is, or tell me how you
Yes.
treat.
Mo
Yeah.
so most of our service members are in some sort of counseling or therapy, and that is very, very helpful. There are also many programs out there now that are being developed through some institutes of higher learning,
Mm.
through the generous donations of some very well-known organizations. And
Hmm.
we do a lot of support of these programs. Um, and they are PTSD and TBI based. So they're looking
Yeah.
at diagnostics for TBI and then also treating PTSD.
One of the sad things is those symptoms or behaviors are so tough on relationships at a time when individuals need the support the most. Do you help with services for the family beyond the individual so that they can be there and be more tolerant or accepting of those things that aren't pleasant?
Sure, we do our best with that. Absolutely, it's a huge challenge. And we say it's kind of a ripple effect, right? And so we do a lot of caregiver support, a lot of family support, supporting the children. We have multiple programs for children. Um, some of my favorites this summer, I participated in one Zoom call, zoo visit with a bunch of children of wounded warriors, where we went to the zoo virtually and painted a birdhouse. And so they pull us in as nurses to some of that other programming, which is absolutely wonderful. But a big part of my role with the caregivers is, again, that education. Because once you teach them and show them and help them better understand the reasons that he may be different, um, and why there are valid reasons that he may be different, and then how to mitigate those changes and those challenges. Just all that education gives them so much more power, empowers them, and helps them to better understand. And many times, it's pretty effective at helping manage just whatever those challenges might be.
Well, along the lines of knowledge is power, because I'm a big believer in that too. Um, One of the things that we do at the Brain Donor Project, while we work with many affected people with a lot of different kinds of disorders, and as well as TBI and
Sure.
mental illness, serious mental illness, maybe the largest single category of
Is it?
disorder that people report when they pre-register, is we're now starting to lean on people to talk to their family and friends, not only about their own wishes and how they can help with that, but to consider brain donation as well. Because many times people who feel like, I don't have a neurologic disorder, so they're not going to want my brain. But the opposite of that is so true, because these unaffected controls are needed in every single study. And so I wondered if you get the chance to talk to families about how they can also contribute to research by, and if you haven't, that's fine, but I'm going to ask you if you would, because we need those so bad. How do you feel about that?
That's an ongoing conversation for, I think, all of us as nurses. We just recently were convened in Dallas together, and we had some of those conversations around what should be the primary things we are discussing with our patients and our families. And I think across the board, in the entire medical realm, it's critical that we have those conversations with people, um, because you're right, controls are also important. I think not only for brain study, but for any number of, just donating your body
Yeah,
for study, in so many ways is a great way. I know there are cultural and spiritual and other barriers for some people, but in many places that's also misunderstood.
it
And so
is.
educating about that is really powerful.
It is. And the organ donation industry, we'll call it, even though that sounds really weird, has done a great job of educating people about how, religious, you know, perceived religious barriers really aren't barriers, that most of the major
Exactly.
religions, go along with it. And my perception is, I don't know if you've had this when you're talking to military families, but so many people just don't even know that brain donation is a thing, or they think it's a regular part of organ donation, or, that it's part of body donation, which, yes, they take your brain, but they don't use it for neurologic study. When you approach a family, are you usually the one bringing it up, or do they? What's your read
Yeah,
on that?
many times it's something that I'm bringing up. It's just not at the forefront of their thought process at that time.
Yeah.
So it's a conversation. The last incident I had to have this opportunity was actually someone that you have spoken with, I believe. And we had the conversation in a parking lot, due to
Oh,
COVID, unfortunately. Um, and so I'll never forget that, but it was well received. And it was kind of one of those aha moments, actually, where everyone just looked at me when I said it and said, wow, yes, of course. He would
oh,
want that. We know he would want that. And so difficult conversation to have, but I just sit back and take that deep breath and kind of ask for some divine,
guidance.
leadership
Yeah.
with regards to the words and how to say them
Oh,
and with as
I
much
know what you
compassion as
mean.
possible. And it
Oh,
it
look at
happens
you.
usually. It happens okay.
Good for you. Good for you. It's tough though, you're right. And so many people haven't thought of it, And so that's one of my challenges, maybe yours as well, because if you haven't had the chance, thank God you're working so one-on-one with all these people that you sometimes do have the opportunity to discuss it before the time comes. If you haven't had the chance to discuss it prior, then it's almost too much. And that's my
At that
fear
moment.
as
Absolutely.
back to the thing about controls. There's a giant study with the Brain Initiative now, where they're going to be atlasing every single cell in the human brain, and they're going to need significant amounts of control tissues.
Yes.
So I'm really feeling the urgency about control tissues because, think about that for a second. They're going to need that tissue across every age range and demographic axis. And so if people haven't yet heard anything about brain donation, it's a much tougher topic.
Right.
And so I worry about people who, the first time they hear about brain donation is because they're being asked to consent to donate the brain of a loved one who has died in an accident, and they
Right.
haven't even gotten their arms around the fact yet that they're gone. So, two giant problems with that. One, it's almost cruel to approach with that. Even those of us who understand the medical value of this, it's almost cruel. And secondly, you get one chance to ask that question,
Right.
just one. And you're not likely to get a consent if people can't deal. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And many times time is of the essence,
Yep.
and so you're in a time crunch many times. And so it's absolutely a critical conversation to be having way prior,
Yeah.
way prior.
Yeah. Oh, you're a peach. I love this work you've done. Thank you so much for joining me. Any other words of wisdom for families who are dealing with a veteran who's trying to do their best?
Wow. Probably my greatest words would be they have served and sacrificed and they should be thriving, not just surviving. And there are so many resources out there. They do not have to do this alone. Many, many, many families are still trying to do it alone. And what we try to impress upon our service members is that they never did anything alone in the military, hardly ever. They always needed their team. In the Marine Corps, they call it your fire team. And so they do everything with at least one other person. They don't have to do anything alone. No one's alone. And so we want them to know that and to always be able to trust that and to just take that step back and be willing to accept the help when it's there. Um, there are absolutely absolutely people out there who want to help. And so it's just a matter of just being willing to accept it. So,
That's a lovely message. I can see why you are very good at your job.
well, it's a
Thanks so.
blessing. It's a great population, and it's a blessing actually to work with people. I think the greatest growth comes in struggle. And so I just always see great potential in folks who've done what they've done, and I really do believe that they have every opportunity to move forward as best they can. They should be given every opportunity to move forward as best they can.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate you joining us today. It's been a
Thank
lovely
you.
conversation. I've
You're
really
lovely. It
enjoyed
was so fun to join you.
it. All right, you take care.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
You
Okay.
too.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Coming Home Well podcast with your guest host, Tish Hevel. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. If you're interested in pre-registering for brain donation, please visit braindonorproject.org. Follow us on Instagram at ComingHomeWellPodcast_BTS. Thank you for listening to Coming Home Well.